Welcome to the Reasonable Southerner podcast. The South isn't all magnolias in the moonlight, but neither is it all racism and violence. We are just like you. My name is Frances Coleman. I share my insights about my life and yours. As the NFL's regular season approaches, I'm sure we'll see many a pro football player once again refuse to stand for the national anthem. Some will stay in the locker room, while others will line up with their teammates, but instead of standing for the Star-Spangled Banner, they'll drop to one knee. The folks who don't like this will certainly curse those players, and they drive along sporting a white sticker on the windows of their vehicle, which depicts an irreverent little character urinating on the letters NFL. I don't mind their exercise of free speech, and you know what? We should respect what those football players are doing just as much. It's not an insult to the American flag. It's a peaceful protest against police brutality and racial inequality. If that offends you, so be it. As for me, my father fought in World War II so that young American men could one day destroy their draft cards. Not that he had any use for draft dodgers. My father parachuted into France on the opening night of the Allied invasion of Europe so that 2 American medalists could give the Black Power salute at the 1968 Summer Olympics. He shook his head at the TV footage of that event, not understanding why they were doing what they were doing. My father was wounded 3 times between the June 1944 invasion and the May 1945 German surrender, so that 25 years later, protesters could burn the U.S. flag in the streets of American cities. Those images nearly made him sick. But he never said that we shouldn't allow the demonstrations, the protest, the resistance to authority. He never suggested that the protesters weren't patriots or that they were traitors. He never said, lock 'em up and throw away the key, or anything close to that. Because when you've gone from college ROTC straight into the Army and eventually onto a troop ship headed for England, when you've killed men who were trying to kill you, and when you've written letters to the parents of men under your command who weren't so lucky, then not much else rattles you. You're able to see the protesters' behavior not as the actions of people who don't like their country, but as the actions of people who don't like what their country is doing. When Daddy's namesake, our oldest sibling, was drafted and sent to Vietnam, my father was the only person in the family who intimately understood what he would face. It was a different war from the one Daddy had fought in. In his war, generals had been allowed to fight to win, but some things about war never change. Daddy believed in his country, and he supported what at the time seemed to be a war worth waging, but he was not blind or naive. He questioned U.S. strategy, and when reports first surfaced of American troops massacring hundreds of civilians in the tiny village of My Lai, he did not doubt that the massacre had occurred. War, he knew, had always been and would always be a brutal and horrible thing. He and the rest of the greatest generation fought their war to keep Germany and Japan from destroying our country and Europe. They also fought it to ensure that their descendants, in addition to being free from conquest, would be free to say, think, and do as they pleased. They wouldn't be subject to patriotic litmus tests or oaths, and if they didn't want to recite the Pledge of Allegiance or stand for the national anthem, well, then that would be their privilege, because they would be Americans, and Americans are free to love their country, free to disagree with their country, and yes, free to disrespect their country. In repressed countries, authoritarian governments imprison people they consider disrespectful or unpatriotic. Here we may flinch when dissidents march or when athletes won't stand for the national anthem. We may criticize the players, take them to task on social media, or refuse to watch their games. But we should respect their freedom to express their views as much as we cherish our freedom to disagree with their actions. If he were here today, I wonder what my father would say about Americans who parade around with Nazi flags. Those were the same Nazi flags carried by dedicated young German men who did their dead-level best to kill him. They didn't succeed in that. He killed and ordered the deaths of plenty of them. He wasn't proud of that. In fact, it haunted him. What would he say about those who glory in death and destruction? Not much, I don't think. But he would not stop them. If I sit very still and think about him, I can hear him growl punks under his breath. But I still think he would say that Americans have the right to think and act freely as long as they don't impinge on the rights of others. He knew who we were. We're Americans, all of us. And when we refer to our nation as the greatest country on earth, this kind of freedom is one of the reasons it remains an apt description. Ed Barrett did a lot more than wave the flag and ride around in a truck with silly stickers pasted on the window. He shed his blood 3 times. He killed people. He came back and lived with all of that. He made those sacrifices so other Americans could hold their heads up and protest things they think are unfair, wrong, or wicked. If you don't get that, then you don't get what it is to live in a free society. If you don't understand that freedom means allowing ideas that you don't like, then you don't understand what makes us a great nation, one worth bleeding and dying for. My father made those sacrifices so football players could take a knee or sit out the ceremony altogether. He didn't suffer so that some kook with a Nazi flag could say that such behavior was verboten. That's just what he fought against. If you don't get that, then think about him the next time you stand up and put your hand over your heart. Think about him. I'm Frances Coleman. I've worked for newspapers for more than 45 years, from Texas to my native Louisiana, and finally to my home near Mobile, Alabama. I've been a reporter, an editorial writer, a columnist, and an editorial page editor. I've commented on the BBC, been a guest on the Rachel Maddow Show, and had my column distributed nationwide. If you like this podcast, please follow it. It's free, and even if you don't like it, I hope you'll find it thought-provoking.